Let me start writing. This will be a long story, so I'll deliver it fully here. I need to pause right here, because if I don't tell you what happened before I walked up to that man's front door, none of it will make sense. I drove 40 minutes across Denver on a Wednesday morning, parked on a quiet street in Cherry Creek, and knocked on the door of a man I'd never met face to face. I wasn't there to fight. I wasn't there to beg. I was there because after 32 years of marriage, I needed to look the man in the eye and understand exactly what kind of person had been sitting across from my wife for the past 8 months. When he opened that door and said what he said, something went cold inside me. Not rage, colder than rage. The kind of cold you feel when everything you suspected turns out to be true, and then turns out to be so much worse. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Frank Calloway. I'm 64 years old. For 31 years I worked as a forensic accountant, the last 18 of those, as a senior partner at a firm in Denver that handled fraud investigations for insurance companies, law firms, and federal agencies. My entire career was built on one simple principle: numbers don't lie. People lie. But if you follow the numbers long enough, patiently enough, they will always show you the truth. I thought I'd applied that principle to every corner of my life. I thought I was immune to being blindsided. I was wrong. It started on a Saturday in late February. My wife, I'll call her Carol, because that's her name, said she was going to her ceramics class. She'd started taking it the previous spring, every Saturday morning, 10 to noon at a studio in Highlands Ranch. I'd never had any reason to question it. She'd even brought home a lopsided bowl once, laughing at herself, saying the instructor was very kind about it. So when she picked up her bag that Saturday, kissed me on the cheek, and said she'd be back by 1, I was sitting at the kitchen table drinking my second cup of coffee and reading the paper. What I wasn't expecting was a call from my daughter 20 minutes later. My daughter, she's 31, works as a travel nurse, was back in Denver that weekend. Visiting, had gone out for a run along the Cherry Creek Trail. She called me from her earbuds, voice light and a little confused, and said, "Dad, I just passed Mom's car on the trail parking lot, but I didn't see her on the trail anywhere. Her car was parked next to a silver Range Rover. Isn't her ceramics place in the other direction?" I told her she probably just stopped for coffee. I told her not to worry about it, but I was already doing the arithmetic in my head. Ceramics studio was southwest. Cherry Creek Trail was northeast. 30 minutes in the wrong direction. I didn't say anything when Carol came home that afternoon. She seemed happy, relaxed, talked about a new glazing technique, showed me a small photo on her phone of what she claimed was her project. I nodded. I smiled, but the forensic accountant in me had already taken his first note. The following Saturday, I told Carol I was going to spend the morning at the hardware store and then the driving range. Instead, I drove to the ceramics studio in Highlands Ranch and parked across the street at 8:50. At 10:05, I had my answer. Carol's car was not there. I waited until 10:30 to be certain. 12 registered students' cars in that lot. None of them hers. I drove home, made lunch, and said nothing. That evening, I opened our household email account, the one we'd shared for years, where bank statements and bills were sent. Carol rarely logged in. I handled the finances, always had. What I found in the statements took me a moment to process, the way it takes a moment for your eyes to adjust when you walk into a very dark room. 6 months earlier, Carol had opened a personal savings account in her name only. I hadn't been aware of it. Linked to that account were 3 transfers from our joint money market fund: $15,000, $22,000, and $30,000, spread out across different months. $67,000 total, moved quietly, incrementally, small enough to avoid triggering the alerts I'd set up on our primary account, just large enough to mean something serious. I sat in my home office for a long time after that. The walls in there are covered with my kids' school photos, my son's college graduation picture, a framed letter of commendation from a federal case I'd helped crack in 2011. I looked at all of it and tried to reconcile what I was seeing in those statements with the woman who'd made me soup when I had pneumonia 3 winters ago. I couldn't. The next morning, I called my old colleague Patrice. She'd retired 2 years before me from the same firm, but she still did private consulting work. Sharp, discreet, absolutely unshakable. I'd trusted her with sensitive case information for 20 years. "Frank," she said when she heard my voice. "You okay? You sound like someone stepped on your chest. I need some help." Quiet. Personal. A pause. "How personal?" "My wife." She didn't ask me if I was sure. She just said, "Send me what you have and give me 48 hours. What Patrice sent back changed the scope of everything. Carol had not only moved $67,000 into a personal account, she had used that account to wire funds in 2 installments to a company called Pinnacle West Property Group. Total, $50,000. Described in the wire memo as an investment deposit. The registered agent for Pinnacle West Property Group was a man named Ryan Stafford. I ran the name myself. Ryan Stafford, 41 years old, listed address in Cherry Creek. No verifiable real estate license in Colorado. Pinnacle West Property Group had been registered as an LLC 14 months earlier. No physical office. A slick website with stock photos of luxury properties and a lot of language about exclusive pre-development investment opportunities. The kind of language that sounds impressive until you realize it means nothing. I pulled his social media. Polished profile. Photos of him at charity galas, on ski slopes, on what looked like a yacht. Comments from women in his replies, warm, familiar. The kind of comments that belong to people who think they know someone well. I already knew what Ryan Stafford was. I'd spent 31 years identifying exactly this kind of man in financial fraud cases. What I didn't know yet was the full scope of what my wife had gotten herself into and whether she understood that she was being used. I needed more. Not assumptions, evidence. So I did what I'd always done in my career. I became invisible, and I paid attention. Over the next 3 weeks, I documented everything. Patrice helped with surveillance on 2 of the Saturdays when I couldn't cover it myself. Carol was meeting Ryan at a wine bar in Cherry Creek, always the same one. Always mid-morning when it was mostly empty. They stayed 2 to 3 hours each time. From the photos Patrice took from across the street, the body language wasn't ambiguous. His hand on her arm, her leaning in, the particular kind of laughter you only produce when you're trying to impress someone. On the 3rd Saturday, Patrice got close enough to hear fragments of their conversation. She texted me afterward. He's pitching her a second investment. Says the first project is days from closing, asking for another $40K. She seemed hesitant, but he talked her back around. "Frank, she doesn't know what she's dealing with." I sat with that message for a long time. She doesn't know what she's dealing with. But here's where it got complicated. Because a week later, I got access to something I hadn't expected. Carol had logged into our shared email on her laptop and forgotten to log out. While she was in the shower, I opened her personal email and found the thread with Ryan. What was in those messages wasn't just the professional-sounding investment updates he'd been sending her. It was also something I hadn't prepared myself for. "Carol, I think about you constantly. When this deal closes, we won't have to keep meeting in secret. You deserve so much better than the life you've been living." "You really think so?" Sometimes I wonder if I've just been going through the motions for so long I forgot what it felt like to want something for myself. "You deserve everything, and I'm going to give it to you. We just need to be patient a little longer." I took screenshots. I put her laptop back exactly where I found it. I went and stood in the backyard for about 15 minutes, just looking at the mountains. We'd bought this house partly for that view. Carol had loved it. She'd said, the day we moved in, that she could spend the rest of her life looking at those mountains and never get tired of them. I thought about that while I looked at them. Then I went back inside and made dinner. Over the next month, while Carol believed I was oblivious, I was building a case the way I'd built cases my whole career, methodically, without emotion clouding the work. Every wire, every communication I'd been able to access preserved. Patrice found 2 other women in Colorado who had invested in Pinnacle West Property Group, one in Fort Collins, one in Colorado Springs. Both had been told their initial investments were earning returns. Neither had received a dime. One of them, a 62-year-old recently divorced woman, had put in $90,000 and was now consulting with an attorney. That was the moment I understood exactly what Ryan Stafford was. He wasn't just a man having an affair with my wife. He was running a con that the affair was part of. The romantic relationship was the mechanism. The investment was the theft. And Carol, whatever her feelings, whatever her choices about our marriage, was not his girlfriend. She was his mark. I needed to decide how to play this. And I needed help. I called my son. He's 34, works in commercial banking in Chicago. When I told him I needed to talk, and to not mention it to his mother, he drove in that weekend without asking questions. We sat on the back patio with coffee, and I laid out everything I had. He went very quiet in the way he does when he's processing something he doesn't want to be true. He's always been like that, measured, careful, slow to react. When he finally looked up from the papers I'd given him, his jaw was set. She transferred $67,000? So far. And this guy, you're sure he's running a scam? I've identified 3 victims. There may be more. His LLC has no real assets, no active projects, no license. The investment contracts he has them sign are structured to give him complete legal cover. He takes the money, the project falls through, and he moves on. My son put down his coffee. Dad, she might not know. I know she might not. So, what are you going to do? I'm going to do this right. The same way I'd handle it professionally. We document everything. We consult an attorney. And when the time is right, we present it. My son nodded slowly. Does Sarah know? Not yet. I'm calling her tonight. My daughter cried on the phone. Not for long, she's tough. Always has been, but for a moment she just went silent and I could hear her breathing. Then she said, Daddy, I'm coming home next weekend, and we're going to figure this out. She did. And what she brought with her, beyond her own steady presence, was a clarity of purpose that I found steadying. The 3 of us spent Saturday evening at the kitchen table going through everything while Carol attended a book club she'd recently joined. Sarah had always been the organized one, the planner. She made a list of every piece of evidence, every legal exposure Carol had, every legal exposure I had, and every action Ryan Stafford had taken that crossed the line from immoral into potentially criminal. Dad, she said at one point, looking up from the papers, I think we need to contact those other women directly. If they're willing to file complaints together, there's a much stronger case for the DA's office. That was my next step. What about Mom? She looked at me carefully. When do we tell her what we know? I'd been thinking about that for weeks. The timing mattered. The confrontation, when it came, needed to happen when I had everything in order. When Carol couldn't minimize what she'd done or what had been done to her, and when there was no escape from the full reality of it. Soon, I said. 2 weeks later, I drove to Cherry Creek and knocked on Ryan Stafford's door. I want to be precise about this part because it's the part that changed something in me permanently. He opened the door in a polo shirt and slacks, holding a phone. Mid-40s, good-looking in an easy, practiced way. He looked at me with a polite, slightly quizzical expression. The expression of a man who opens his door to strangers and manages them smoothly. Can I help you? I'm Frank Calloway, I said. Carol Calloway is my wife. Something moved behind his eyes. A quick recalibration. His expression didn't change much, but I'd spent 30 years reading people in depositions and boardrooms. He was deciding, very fast, how to play this. Frank, he said, as if we were old acquaintances. Come in. Let's talk. I didn't go in. I stayed in the doorway. I know what Pinnacle West Property Group is, I said. I've spoken with Diane Walsh in Fort Collins and Patricia Nguyen in Colorado Springs. I've reviewed your LLC registration, your investment contracts, and your transaction history. I've worked with forensic accounting for 31 years. I know exactly what you've been doing. He let out a slow breath. The polished smile dropped. What replaced it was something resigned and practical. The face of a man who has been caught before and knows when to cut his losses. Listen, Frank. With Carol, I want you to know. She came to me. She was a willing investor. She understood the risks. I'm not here to argue with you. I said. I'm here because I wanted to look you in the eye once before this goes where it's going. I filed a formal complaint with the Colorado Division of Securities yesterday. The other 2 women have retained attorneys, and I've passed everything I have to a contact at the FBI's Financial Fraud Unit. I paused. You might want to call a lawyer. I turned and walked back to my car. He didn't call Carol to warn her. I found out later why. He'd already started distancing himself. By the time I drove home that morning, he had stopped responding to her messages. I didn't know that yet, but Carol did. She'd been watching his responses slow over the previous week, and by that Wednesday she was frantic in ways she was trying to hide from me, spending long stretches in the bedroom with her phone, emerging with red eyes and the careful composure of someone working very hard to seem fine. I waited until Friday evening. My son had flown back in. Sarah was there. We'd told them both what was happening that week, and they'd agreed without hesitation to be present, not to attack their mother. But because this needed to be said in front of the people it had affected, Carol made pasta that night, the way she always did on Fridays. We sat at the dining room table, the same table where we'd had birthday dinners and holiday meals and late-night conversations during the years when the kids were growing up. The pendant light over the table cast everything in warm yellow. Carol was talking about a podcast she'd been listening to. I let her finish. Then I put a folder on the table and said, Carol, I need to talk to you about Ryan Stafford. The room went completely still. She looked at the folder. She looked at me. Color left her face in a single, visible wave. What? She said slowly. Is that? It's a documentation of the transfers from our joint money market fund into your personal savings account, and from there to Pinnacle West Property Group. It's a summary of what Pinnacle West actually is. And it's a record of the conversations you and Ryan Stafford have been having for the past 8 months. You went through I protected our finances, which is something I've done for 32 years. I kept my voice even. I'd practiced this. Carol, Ryan Stafford is a fraud. He's done this before. 3 women before you that we've identified so far. He builds a relationship, introduces an investment opportunity, takes the money, and disappears. She shook her head. That's not you don't know him. He stopped answering your messages 3 days ago. Silence. Mom, Sarah said quietly. Look at the documents. Carol reached out and opened the folder with a hand that wasn't quite steady. She looked at the pages. I watched her read. I watched her expression shift through several things I can't easily name recognition. Something like shame, then something that looked like the slow collapse of a story she'd been telling herself for a long time. He told me the projects were real, she said, mostly to herself. I know. He said the returns would. She stopped. She looked up. How much did I lose? $50,000, I said. That was transferred to his company. The other $17,000 is still in your personal account. My son leaned forward. Mom, where did you think this was going? Not the investment, everything. Where did you think it was going? She looked at him. Her eyes had filled. I don't know, she said. I felt invisible. I felt like I had disappeared inside this house, and he made me feel like I existed again, like I was interesting, like there was still time to do something different. So you were planning to leave, I said. She didn't answer right away. When she did, it was barely audible. I thought about it. Carol. I waited until she looked at me. I'm not going to pretend I don't understand how a marriage can make someone feel that way. I've been here too. But you didn't come to me. You didn't tell me anything was wrong. You moved $67,000 out of our accounts and handed 50 of it to a man who has done this to at least 3 other women. I didn't know he was. No. But you know what you were doing with our money. And you know what you were planning with your life. The 4 of us sat at that table for a long time after that. Carol cried. Not the defensive tears of someone trying to manage a situation, something deeper than that. The kind of crying that looks like grief. My son sat with his arms on the table and didn't say much after his initial question. Sarah was the one who eventually spoke again, practically and gently at the same time. Mom, here's where things stand legally. The transfers are documented. Technically, because the money market fund was joint, Dad has grounds for a civil claim. He's not pursuing that, but the marriage, That's something you two have to decide. What Ryan Stafford did to you is potentially criminal. The DA's office will likely be in contact with you as a complaining witness, since you're also a victim. You need an attorney. Carol looked at me. Are you filing for divorce? I had thought about this answer for a long time. I don't know yet, I said honestly. I know that something has been broken that I don't know how to fix. I know that I needed to tell you the truth about Ryan before it went any further. What happens after that, I don't know. There's a version of this story where I tell you we sat together and cried and found our way back to each other. I want to be honest with you. That is not what happened. Not quickly, and maybe not completely. Carol moved into the guest room that night. Over the following weeks, we had the kind of long, difficult conversations that probably should have happened years earlier, about the way she had felt sidelined and unseen, about the ways I had buried myself in work even after retirement, about all the things two people let calcify quietly over decades without ever saying them out loud. Some of those conversations were the most honest we'd ever had. Some of them were devastating. Ryan Stafford, for his part, did not disappear cleanly. The Colorado Division of Securities opened a formal investigation. 2 of the other women filed civil suits. A contact at the FBI field office who had received my documentation called me 3 weeks after my visit to his door to tell me the matter was being looked at seriously. Ryan's LLC was frozen. His assets, such as they were in dispute. He hired a lawyer and got very quiet. He has not contacted Carol since the week I knocked on his door. Whatever story he told himself about her, or told her about himself, he was done the moment he knew I had documentation. Carol never got her $50,000 back. Not really. Some of it may come through civil proceedings eventually. Most of it is probably gone. She has come to understand through sessions with a therapist she started seeing in April, through long talks with Sarah, through her own reckoning with what she was willing to tell herself in order to feel something that what Ryan did was calculated from the beginning, that the things he said to her were said to other women, that the warmth she felt in that wine bar was a tool he used the same way I use a calculator efficiently, without sentiment. That understanding hasn't made it easier exactly, but it has made it clearer. My son told me something last summer when we were fishing up in Rocky Mountain National Park, just the 2 of us. We'd been quiet for a while, comfortable quiet, the kind you can only have with someone you've known since they were born. And he said, "Dad, do you regret not confronting her sooner, when you first found out?" I thought about that. "No," I said. "If I'd confronted her at the beginning, she would have defended him. She believed in him. I needed her to see the whole truth before I could show her any of it. That's just how evidence works." He nodded and cast his line. "Were you scared?" he asked after a moment. "When you were gathering all of it?" "Yes," I said, because that was true. Not of what I'd find. I was scared of who I'd find. Scared that the woman I'd shared my life with had become someone I didn't recognize. And scared, maybe most of all, that I might have been part of why. That's the part people don't always talk about when these things happen. The easy narrative is that someone was betrayed and someone was a villain. The longer you're married, the more you understand that people don't usually turn toward the wrong thing without turning away from something first. I'm not excusing what Carol did. The deception, the money, the months of deliberate choices. None of that is acceptable, and I haven't pretended it was. But I've spent the last 10 months also asking myself what I failed to see, what I failed to say, what I let go quiet between us for years because it was easier than the conversation. I don't have clean answers to those questions. I'm not sure I'm supposed to. Carol and I are still in the same house. I want to be honest about that too. It's not simple, and it is not fully resolved. We are in what I'd describe as a careful reconstruction. Some days it feels like progress. Some days one of us says the wrong thing, and the distance opens up again like a floorboard you forgot was loose. We are both still doing the work that probably should have started years before any of this did. What I know for certain is this. I'm not the same man I was before last February. I'm more awake to the things I was letting slip past me. More willing to say out loud what I should have said quietly for years. More aware that 32 years of building a life together doesn't exempt you from the work of staying present inside it. My daughter called me last week just to check in. We talked for an hour about nothing in particular, her job, a book she was reading, a hike she'd done near Flagstaff. Near the end of the call, she said, "How are you actually doing, Dad?" I told her the truth. I said I was okay. I said I was still figuring some things out. I said that some mornings I stood on the back porch with my coffee and looked at those mountains and felt genuinely, simply grateful to be standing there, which is something I hadn't felt in a long time before all of this started. Funny how a crisis can do that. Strip away the noise and leave you with what's actually real. "Dad," she said, "you handled everything with so much dignity." I told her I didn't know about that. I told her I handled it the only way I knew how, carefully, patiently, with respect for what the truth actually was, even when the truth was something I didn't want to find. That's all any of us can do, really. You can't protect yourself from being blindsided. You can't guarantee that the person you love will always make choices that deserve your love. What you can control is how you respond when the floor drops out. Whether you panic and swing, or whether you go quiet, gather what's real and act with the kind of steadiness you'll be able to live with afterward. I spent 31 years following numbers until they showed me the truth about strangers. It turned out the hardest truth I ever had to follow was the one inside my own house. But I followed it, all the way to the end, and I'm still standing. That's enough for me.